Hey, so this is Cassidy and Kyle. We got Dimitri with us today. This is Trigger Point Tuesday, and we're going to geek out about something here because we don't hear much about it. We're going to talk about how the hand really affects the shoulder. And there's so many sports that the hand affects the shoulder, but it's not really talked about too much. What we typically geek out about is, the foot, the knee, and the hip, and how that affects biomechanics in this core to extremity movement pattern. Now, the reality of this is what I want you to think about here is the hand is the foot, okay, so that the wrist is the ankle, the elbow is the knee, and the shoulder is the hips, okay? So when we talk about how they all kind of tie in together, the more you control your hands, the more mobility you're taking out of the shoulder. Just like the more control you put into the foot, the more jeopardy you're putting your knee and your hips into. Would you agree with that, Kyle?
I do, but we have to look at load. So whenever we're on our feet, we can say that the ankles take load and there's a certain amount of pronation, supination, as you just mentioned, that happens there. But most of the time, the hands and the wrist are not loaded. So then, how do we load that up to make it that example like you're saying?
Yeah, but I mean, once again, load is a relative term. I mean, when we talk about load, and just pick up the kettlebell for me real quick. Now, is it loaded now? Are the hands loaded?
It is loaded.
Absolutely.
More so distraction than compression, and if we look at the ground coming up, all those joints are compressed.
Okay, but what happens here, I'm going to go ahead and bring it up slightly. Oh, wait, did your hand pronate? Did it supinate? What did we do? Did we put the hand in a flexion? Or is it what we would call dorsiflexion? What just happened there?
All of it.
Okay, so then ultimately the extensors and the flexors of the forearm are going to be controlling that movement pattern of the hand. Right? So then the elbow is going to have to really support that movement pattern. So if I take it away, and if I just go ahead and bring your hands forward, and you got great muscular structure here. So structure the hands great. So now rotate your hands outward, and rotate them inward. Instantly we start to become more vascular because we're working the system. Put a nice bend into the elbow slightly. Now go ahead and rotate. Rotate, and now rotate out. Now the difference here is if we stay in this position, we've got little torque on the wrist and the elbow, right? As we turn inward, now all of a sudden we're putting torque onto the muscles. So you can see the muscles are going to come in and attach here. So as we rotate the hand, we put more torque into the muscles here, which then can end up happening here. What can happen here, Kyle?
If it's rotated in, these muscles here start to get lengthened. You get into a whole eccentrically loaded type of a situation. I mean, potential for injury, jeopardizing motion in the elbow, perhaps?
Absolutely, but are we loaded or unloaded here? He has not unloaded the fist.
He's loaded.
So he's loaded. So just as you maintain dorsiflexion in the foot, he's maintained dorsiflexion in the wrist. Therefore, the muscles here are loaded. Therefore, if he's jumping a rope, go ahead and go side to side there. If you're jumping a rope there, the more you control, go ahead and rotate your hands. Look at the muscular structure here. Can we end up having what's called rhabdo, or can we end up having DOM set into this area because we've controlled the rotational movement so much that this area is going to fatigue?
Definitely more fatigue. More fatigue, more structure relating up to the shoulder, so you're not going to have the best biomechanical position up through the torso region.
Okay.
Torso, shoulder, all the way up to the cervical
spine. So compartmental syndrome of the lower leg, are we talking about the same thing within the forearm?
Could, if it stays structured over time like that. Yes.
Absolutely. So if we're talking about a tennis player, and all of a sudden we've got load hitting load where you hit the ball, right? Are we flexing to such a great degree that we're jeopardizing around the insertion points around the elbow there, and then ultimately, once again, we've got compartmental syndrome of this area.
Okay, I'm with you there, but so many times whenever we look at the remedy here, we go after the shoulder, right? Because the hand is so far away from the core, so to speak, we go after the shoulder first. So what do we do?
Interesting. So if you take that, and check this out, if we're talking about core to extremity, we're talking about moving the hips, so core to extremity movement, that's where you're going to drive the most power out of the body, right? But if we're talking about what you're saying here, all of a sudden this is core to extremity, right? So we're going to go here to control this movement, but at the same time, what we have to really think about is, I got to get you to relax the hand. If we relax the hand, go into a pull-up position, all of a sudden, see, we go from here, we go from this position, we rotate the hand, we put all of this area into tension, right? You feel the tension in this area, right? So then we're going to put this area, the triceps going to go into traction there, and then the shoulder is going to be activated for minute 1. if the shoulder's activated for minute 1 and you go to pull your body up, just go into that position there, you better make sure that your T-spine region is the scap region is really in a positive position, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, what's going to happen to the shoulder?
It's going to be jeopardized. If we can't retract and lock the shoulder blades back and down, or at least whenever we're pulling up, then what you'll see is that humerus start to actually rotate forward and go up, and could lead to shoulder impingement. Okay,
so then come back down. So the idea here, let's talk about jump rope, let's talk about kettlebell, let's talk about pull-ups. All of them are closed chain or open chain movements. They're loaded, or they're eccentrically loaded.
They're loaded. If you get a good grip on the jump rope, it can be loaded just the way the other ones are. So
okay.
Closed chain.
Okay, so we're going to say that they're closed chain, but you don't really think about that because closed chain really happens to do with the ground more than anything. But closed chain in the hand, does that make sense?
If you relate it to being structured and fixed, then it does make sense.
Okay, so if you don't reduce the load, if you never release the hands, then the forearm and the shoulder is going to be jeopardized. Once you go up into this movement here, if I control this movement, no matter where I go, all of a sudden, if I control the elbow, is the shoulder going to be jeopardized?
Yes.
Absolutely. So when you're going through your CrossFit kind of movements, or let's go to tennis, if you're controlling your forearm and you're really controlling the shoulder, you're controlling the elbow, you're controlling the hand, then ultimately we can compromise your performance or your endurance, the amount of time that you can do the same thing over and over and over and over again. The intensity, we're going to jeopardize that intensity by trying to over-control the movement, right?
Structured, over-controlled, more fatigue. Makes sense.
So we go back to what your original question was, is why? Why do we go after this area more times than not, right? Because it's what you should do. I mean, the mass, the muscle here, as your shoulder rotates forward, then the elbow has to go outward, and now we're going to have to control the hand here. Well, you've already structurally compromised the shoulder so that the hand has to work that much harder to get in its proper position, right?
Right.
So if we go, okay, let's go to the soft tissue side of things. If we go after the extensions and flexors, we go through our regular MCT programming, we can go through our mashing, we can go through our scrubbing, but ultimately you're going to free up the tissue here. We're going to get greater range of motion in the wrist, right? So for a basketball, a baseball, a soccer player, a CrossFitter, a tennis player, more ankle or more wrist mobility. See, I'm getting confused. I'm thinking about the ankle, but I'm talking about the wrist. Ultimately, the more control or the more range of motion you have here, the more force you can drive out of this area of the body, right?
And you'll take the stress off the elbow.
Even better, because when you stress the elbow, you ever stressed your elbow doing your CrossFit stuff, right? So all of a sudden that elbow gets jeopardized and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do what I love to do anymore. And if you would just let go of the bar a little bit, trust that the freedom of movement is there, you're going to be able to control that movement because you have the strength, not because you have the control. We're going to reduce the strain onto the elbow, but then we can go up and grab your quad baller and work through the tricep area and push through there. Then we're going to free up that posterior chain of the arm, which is just a crazy way of thinking about it, the posterior arm, but that's exactly what we're doing. Then we're going to go into pec major minor, allow that shoulder to rotate back nicely, and then look, your hand ends up being in a nice position automatically, so no matter what, we're able to put it in that position so that you can do whichever sport you choose, right?
So reduce control, reduce the structure, get the shoulder to sit back and down so you free up range of motion all the way through the arm.
So let's repeat this one time. You go after the extensions and flexors, we regain dorsiflexion in the wrist, crazy way of thinking about it. Then of course we're going to go to the kind of the quad bicep, tricep area, of the arm, because if we're equating it to the leg, we're going to free up this area. We're going to go after pec major minor. Might as well go in and get some lats, and then ultimately you're going to have the freedom to have structural integrity from this point, and then we're going to reduce the wear and tear by not controlling the wrist, correct?
That sounds correct.
Crazy way of looking at it. But the bottom line here is you have to look at, the more you control your movement, the more you can tear your movement apart. Your endurance programming will ultimately compromise based on the amount of control you put into that equation. You going to say something? No. All right. This is Cassidy, Kyle, Dimitri. Once again, Trigger Point Tuesday. We challenge you to look at movement in a different way. It's time for you to get out there and move. Come back and visit us next Tuesday, and we'll show you some of this great programming. We'll see you next time.